Johann Sebastian Bach has established himself as the cornerstone of Western music. He has produced more than 1,000 works during his lifetime, synthesizing the essence of all music genres before and during his time, while having the capability of inexhaustible invention, producing compositions which set unmovable benchmarks for all who come after him. All being said, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, as Bach belongs to a family consists of generations of musicians throughout central Germany, including Bach's birthplace, Eisenach. Eisenach is a town located in central Germany. In addition to the Bach family, the town has seen many notable historical figures since the Middle Ages. Saint Elizabeth of Hungary spent most of her life living at the court here during the 13th century. Martin Luther hid himself at the Wartburg Castle for almost a year shortly after the beginning of the Reformation. Composer Georg Philipp Telemann produced a great deal of music while he was serving here as the court musician. And Franz Liszt conducted his oratorio, The Legend of St. Elizabeth, at the Wartburg Castle's ceremonial hall in 1867. Johann Sebastian Bach's father, Johann Ambrosius Bach, was also an accomplished musician. He was hired as the director of town musicians here in Eisenach. Therefore, he and his wife Maria Elisabeth Lamhirt moved from Erfurt to Eisenach in 1671. More than a decade later, Bach was born into an environment surrounded with music. Today, I am meeting with Dr. Jörg Hansen, the director of the famous Bachhaus in Eisenach. Bachhaus Eisenach was once thought to be the house in which Johann Sebastian Bach was born and raised, but recent discoveries have suggested just the opposite. So this was not the actual birthplace of Bach.
Bach biographers thought that it was this house, but later a hobby researcher looked into old tax records. And he found out that Johann Ambrosius Bach, the father of Johann Sebastian, had paid taxes for the house over there.
So just...
And yeah, the dark grey one down the street, yes. This is already the third building at the same place. So this is not actually the house that Bach would have seen.
If Bach didn't live here, so who were living here in this very house when Bach was born?
At the time of his birth, it was owned by the school director, Georg Börstelmann. The house opposite the Bachhaus garden, this is actually the place where Johann Sebastian Bach's father, Johann Ambrosius, first lived when he moved here with his first wife, Elisabeth Lammerhirt, and their just 3 months old young son, Johann Christoph Bach. They lived for rent for 3 years, from 1671 to 1674. We have 2 rooms that are still in the same state as when the museum first opened in 1907. This is this is the bedroom of the house. Typical Erfurt blueprint. The bed is quite short. You would have a hard time sleeping in there.
Does the size of the bed reflect anything about the size of a human body at the time?
Well, yes. Bach was, I think, 1.64 meters.
It was like this.
He was, yes. We have to think that 1.65 meters was still the average in 1900. We can see that Bach wasn't the best in his class. Actually, the first class of the Latin school that he visited, he was just the 47th in class. He also missed a lot of days, and we must think that he was a sickly child. Because school was very strict. You couldn't just stay away and help your parents or have a fun day. You had to go to school unless you were sick. He jumped 1 class to enter the 2nd class of the Latin school. That might have been not a good idea because he wasn't very good in the 2nd class.
But we know that Bach was not always in school a very super bright student. He was just quite ordinary.
Well, he improved. I think he was 12th in class in his last class, so he wasn't a bad student, but he wasn't best in class. We also have a timetable. School started at 6 o'clock in the morning, and it started with catechism lessons. So Luther's catechism, the 6-piece catechism, each of the 6 pieces was taught at the beginning of each school day. So starting with law, with faith and prayer. and then baptism, confession, and the Holy Communion on Saturday. So each day would start with these lessons. And also the Luther songs that Luther had written to go with his catechism, they were sung in each morning. Actually, the school day was very musical.
So Bach grew up with the music of Martin Luther.
Yes.
And that's why in his cantatas we see that many chorale tunes were Luther's chorales.
There are detailed records of which songs were sung in school. You wouldn't be surprised that the same songs that each school day started were the songs that Bach used in 1737 for his Klavierübung Part 3, where he used catechism pieces by Martin Luther. It was the same songs that he had sung in school when he was here in Eisenach with 7, 8, 9 years old.
The young Bach grew up not only singing songs written by Luther, but like Luther himself, Bach was a choir boy at the St. George's Church, where his uncle, Johann Christoph Bach, was serving as the organist at the same time. On March 21st, 1685, Bach was born here in Eisenach. A few days after his birth, his parents took him here to the Georgenkirche, which is the St. George Church, to receive baptism. Bach grew up here in this church listening to the music, and all this music has a strong impact for the rest of his musical life.
Ich denke, irgendwo hier in der Nähe wird er auch gesessen und gestanden haben. Er ist in Eisenach geboren, er ist in Eisenach zur Schule gegangen und war in dieser Zeit im Chorus Musicus. Und dieser Chor hat hier in der Georgenkirche in den Gottesdiensten liturgische Aufgaben gehabt. Und Bach hat also als Kind hier gesungen, das weiß man. Sein Onkel, der Johann Christoph, war zu dieser Zeit Organist. Man kann annehmen, dass Johann Sebastian seinem Onkel sicherlich auf die Finger geschaut hat und bei ihm vielleicht auch was mitbekommen hat und gelernt hat. Johann Sebastian Bach ist im Alter von 2 Tagen am 23. März 1685 hier in dieser Kirche getauft. An diesem Taufstein. Er stand damals an einer anderen Stelle. Heute steht er hier genau in der Mitte. Er ist original erhalten und wird auch heute noch zur Taufe benutzt.
Things changed very quickly when Bach lost his 2 siblings during early childhood, followed by the death of both his parents by the time he was 10 years old. He was left with another brother, Johann Jakob Bach. Both of them were soon adopted by their eldest brother, whose name also Johann Christoph, the organist at St. Michael's Church in Ohrdruf. Under his brother's supervision, Bach was exposed to music written by some of the greatest composers of the day, which gave way to his enrollment later at the prestigious St. Michael's School in Lüneburg, as well as his first official job in Arnstadt. Arnstadt is one of the oldest towns in the state of Thuringia in Germany. Many original sites of Bach's family have survived, including the famous Bach Church, where the young Johann Sebastian Bach held his first professional position as an organist soon after he graduated from the prestigious St. Michael's in Lüneburg. So here we are right in front of the Bach Church in Arnstadt, and I believe that this is the church where Bach had his very first professional position, isn't it?
Yes, he was only 18 years old when he came to Arnstadt in 1703. He was organist at this church for 4 years, and he came to a city where his father grew up and with a big tradition of the Bach family making music. At the very first, it was the Bonifatiuskirche, and it was burned down in big fire, city fire, in the late 16th century, and it was rebuilt in the, I think, 1680s and got a new organ, which was inaugurated by Bach in 1703, and the city was so fascinated by his organ playing that he appointed him as an organist, a very, very young Bach, only 18 years old.
Hallo Jörg.
Hallo.
What did you just play?
Ich habe gespielt O Jesu, wie ist dein Gestalt aus den Neumeisterchorälen.
So that would have been written when Bach was here in Arnstadt.
Ja, das ist ein Stück, welches hier in Arnstadt entstanden ist und es zeigt, wie man schon gehört hat, den sehr einfühlsamen, empfindsamen jungen Bach.
The young J.S. Bach was strongly influenced by the German organist Georg Böhme. In fact, many recent researchers point to the fact that Bach had studied with Böhme during his time in Lüneburg between 1700 and 1702.
In jedem Fall so, dass an diesem Stück, gerade an diesem Pedalsolo, da könnte man ein Stück von Georg Böhme nehmen.
Aha.
Ein Präludium in E-C-Dur, der Anfang ist so ähnlich.
Hier in Arnstadt hat Bach im Grunde genommen für die Chormusik wenig Interesse gehabt. In Arnstadt war er noch, und das war im Unterschied zu den Stadtpfeifern auch letztlich die sehr viel musikalischere Ausbildung. Hier in Arnstadt war er Organist. Wie sein Großonkel Heinrich Bach und wie sein Onkel Johann Christoph Bach und wie sein Onkel Johann Michael Bach, der im Übrigen später sein Schwiegervater wurde, hat er hier versucht, sein Orgelspiel, was nicht schlecht gewesen sein dürfte, sonst hätte er die Anstellung nicht bekommen, zu perfektionieren. Der 18-jährige Johann Sebastian Bach kam hierher und bekam eine Stelle, bei der er deutlich mehr verdiente als sein Vorgänger und auch seine Nachfolger. Und da muss man sich ja tatsächlich fragen, wieso konnte er das? Er konnte es, weil seine Familie über mehrere Generationen in dieser Stadt längst das Musikwesen geprägt hatten.
Und Bach ist Musik.
Und Bach ist Musik, genau.
The Bach family enjoys a long legacy of music making in Arnstadt and throughout the state of Thuringia. Long before Johann Sebastian's time in Arnstadt, many of his ancestors have lived and worked here as organists, composers, court musicians, and town pipers. So behind here I see a tower, and that would have been the tower that the Stadtpfeifer, which were the city musicians, they would have played the music on top of the tower right there.
Yeah, that's true. Well, the tower itself belonged to the castle, which was demolished in the 18th century, but only the tower survived. On top of the tower, there's a small apartment where the town piper lived.
So they live on the tower?
Yes, true. So he was also the watchman and had to watch at the city if there is a fire or something else, if there are enemies approaching.
So they would play some sort of alarm for the city.
Absolutely,
if anything
yes.
happened. So
Yes.
they were kind of a guard,
Yes,
a security
and the music
guard.
was also had also the function of a signal. The first Bach in Arnstadt, Caspar Bach,
Yeah.
in the 1620s, he was here as a town piper and working up there.
And we also know that Johann Sebastian Bach's father, Johann Ambrosius Bach, he was also a Stadtpfeifer.
Yes, he was. He grew up here in Arnstadt, later had his job in Eisenach. Well, they didn't live at the tower, but yes, he had the very same job. We are now walking the way Bach took with his cousin in an August night in 1705 when he came from the house of the town organist Christoph Hartum and walked home in between the church and the town hall. He met the student from the Latin school, Gaius Bach, who approached both and hit Bach's face because Bach insulted him and humiliated him in public and called him Zippelfagottist, which means a greenhorn bassoonist. They had a real argue and then a fight, so Gaius Bach slapped Bach's face. Bach took his sword and wanted
A sword?
a real sword, and well, his cousin went in between and said, "Oh, Sebastian, stop this, let's go home, it's late at night and don't do stupid things," and so everything ended quite smoothly.
So he ended up didn't act on it, but he was about
Yes.
to use his sword, and this tells us that Bach was full of rage, the young Bach, full
Yes,
of
he was
emotions, like we hear in his music.
Yes, absolutely.
This was a really young Bach and just like slouching, you know.
Yeah, well, he's 18, 19, 20 years old. Look at his clothes, very
Casual,
very casual,
unbuttoned.
modern, yes.
So I'm seeing that he's looking at somewhere.
Well, I heard the idea is that he is looking to Lübeck, where he went 300 kilometers footwalk to hear the music of Buxtehude. Buxtehude was his big role model. He took vacation for 4 weeks, but didn't return until 4 months. So we don't really know if he only went to Lübeck to hear Buxtehude playing the organ and to study with him. There were a young generation of musicians traveling to Lübeck around that time, also George Frederick Handel or the young Johann Mattheson, because Buxtehude is quite old and they are looking for a successor. But that changed very quickly when they found out that you have to marry Buxtehude's daughter to get the job. And she was, well, at this time already 30 years old, so 10 years older than Bach and Handel. And so all these young men lost interest in the job very quickly.
This organ chorale prelude by Bach is believed to have been composed after he had visited Buxtehude in Lübeck. Between each chorale phrase, the young Bach would insert extensive improvisational figures which resembles some of Buxtehude's toccatas. On the other hand, the extreme harmonies and unconventional chord progressions make it sound almost like a work composed during the Romantic period. After his return from Lübeck, Bach was summoned by the Arnstadt consistory at the end of February 1706 because he had been away for too long. Additionally, he was also being accused not only for ignoring the high school student ensembles who could never meet his expectation, but also playing complicated music in worship services and even inviting a woman to sing in church. This led Bach to a new position at Mühlhausen in 1707, where he worked for a year and married his first wife, Maria Barbara, until he received an offer to become court organist for the Duke in Weimar, a post which came with a salary far above his in Mühlhausen and was considered one of the most prestigious positions in all of Thuringia. I am meeting with Dr. Mikhail Mao, one of the most prominent Bach scholars of our time, who in May 2005 made a sensational discovery in Weimar. So here we have your discovery from 2005, and we know that you found this piece in Weimar and where it was composed.
In Weimar, we know that Bach served there for 9 years as a court organist and concertmaster. So whenever the Duke had his birthday or name day or so, the employees of the court provided some fancy poems to him.
Right.
So in print, short poems with some fancy wrappers. So, and there's a collection from the period when Bach was court organist there, of almost 1,000 such occasional prints with poems about how beautiful, how great, how tremendous the Duke is. I came across this one and I opened it, and the title, a typical Baroque title, first half of the page is only the full name of the Herzog, of the Duke, and then it is said that a certain pastor from a city nearby Weimar, city of Buttstedt, a pastor named Johann Anton Mylius, provided a birthday poem to the Duke's birthday in 1713. It is said on the title that this pastor provided a poem based on the motto of the Duke. All these dukes had a certain motto, and Wilhelm Ernst, Duke of Saxon-Weimar, he was a strong Lutheran. And his motto was in Latin, omnia cum Deo et nihil sine eo. So translated into English, it is everything with God and nothing without him. There is a poem consisting of 12 stanzas. Each stanza starts with the German version of the Duke's motto, alles mit Gott und nichts ohne ihn. And then there's always a different interpretation of this motto in any of the 12 verses. So this is stanza 7, 10, 11. So when I turned the page, saw the score, especially the soprano clef in the beginning, I thought, oh my God, that looks like Bach. Because, I mean, Bach, he has a very beautiful handwriting, and especially during his Weimar period, he had some fancy ornamentation, especially for the soprano clef, but all the other characteristics of this score are very much Bach-like. One thing is actually visible in the text print. When you look carefully through all the stanzas, then you can see that Mylius decided to use bold types for the first letters of any word in the second line of all the stanzas. And especially the fourth word is not only bold types, but also larger letter than the others. And look,
it's consistent.
Read it downwards.
Wunder.
W-I-L-H-E and so on. And then it turned out it's Wilhelm Ernst. So that's the name of the Herzog.
Very
so
smart.
Actually, Mylius created an acrostic, so consisting of 12 stanzas, because the name of the Herzog is 12 letters.
12 letters.
So, and the other bold types also mean something. So these are the initials of the Herzog. Wilhelm Ernst Herzog zu Sachsen-Weimar. So Wilhelm Ernst, Duke of Sachsen-Weimar. The piece starts with a ritornello only for the basso continuo.
Yeah.
So from here to here, so the ritornello for basso continuo consists of 52 notes. And do you know which birthday it was?
52nd birthday.
Yeah. So I guess that is not by accident. So
No. Well, we see also these numbers in Samantha Passion and other works of Bach.
The Weimar period for Bach was very important in his life. When he arrived in Weimar in 1708, he was just 23 years old. And in Weimar he suddenly had access to music from entire Europe, because the court was very well connected, 2 places in Italy, 2 places in France, and they had a music collection covering almost everything which was composed in entire Europe in early 18th century. And that was a much better situation than he had before in Mühlhausen or in Arnstadt, where he was only a municipal organist and all these cities didn't have a special access to this international repertory. After some years in Weimar, he was able to imitate all the leading European musical styles and then combining everything with everything. Yeah. Almost every year he showed up in the Duke's office saying, "We need to talk again about my salary." So, and it went higher and higher and higher. Started in March 1714. He was promoted concertmaster with the obligation to provide on a monthly basis sacred cantatas for the service. And that was the moment when Bach started composing on a regular basis church cantatas. And all these pieces he created in 1714-15, I mean, they were already masterworks. Look, pieces like Ich hatte viel Bekümmernis, right, or Weinen, Klagen, Sorgen, Zagen, Himmelskönig sei willkommen. They are among our favorite Bach cantatas. Right.
In August of 1717, Bach signed the contract to become the music director at the court of Leopold, Prince of Anhalt-Köthen. But his employer, Wilhelm Ernst of Saxe-Weimar, not only rejected his resignations, but imprisoned Bach for almost a month for obstinate behavior and forcing the question of his dismissal. Bach was eventually released in December of the same year and took his new position in Köthen. Many of Bach's instrumental works were composed during his time in Köthen, such as the Brandenburg concertos, sonatas, partitas, first part of the well-tempered clavier, as well as all the violin concertos and other works.
Bach were conducting the Brandenburg concertos for the first time, for example. I mean, the room looked different. You see here a classical room 100 years later than Bach. So you have to imagine the room much more lower. The ceiling were at the end of these columns. It was silk green tapestry on the side, a lot of paintings. We know from over 40 paintings. There were some musical instruments, some harpsichords were inside the room. And also a big wooden bed used for the levee ceremony was installed here. So we have to imagine Leopold wakened up at the morning in a ritual, maybe accompanied by music played by Bach and his musicians. We don't know that. We only know it from the register that there was actually a bed inside. And usually 2 times a month there were big concerts inside the room. And it's a very, very beautiful imagination for us that Bach was standing here at this very spot playing his music.
It is not by accident that Bach later mentioned that was the best time of my life, because I had a prince who actually not only loved music, but also he knew a lot about music. So in other words, this was a prince who really realized what amazing quality Bach was able to provide in his compositions. The prince even paid 3 people only to carry Bach's own harpsichord from here to Karlsbad, which was a 4-day trip with horses. So in other words, he wanted to make sure that his Kapellmeister, Bach, was able to perform in Karlsbad for all the other authorities and princes and dukes and so on his own instruments. So in other words, Prince Leopold, he wanted to demonstrate that I got him.
Yes.
I got the Cristiano Ronaldo of court Kapellmeisters.
Most of the pupils of Bach were trained on an instrument like this.
Yeah.
And also there is this tale that he used an instrument like this to punish the sons. So they had to play next to the sleeping room until Bach was sleeping. And this is like it used to look in the 30s of the 18th century. So Leopold had this great idea of turning the Renaissance castle into a Baroque one, but he never had the money to complete it.
That's Bach's favorite prince.
He's not 30 on this painting. So you can tell by the painting he must have been very ill his whole life and had some troubles. So this is his...
This is the original?
armor. Yes.
That's the one the Prince Leopold have worn.
Yes, and you see he must be very tiny and not the slimmest one.
Yeah, that's right.
And what I love the most about him, he turned the pharmacy downstairs into a bakery.
There is a chapel inside the castle. The chapel was destroyed in 1878 and went through several renovations for different purposes before it was restored back as the castle chapel in the 1990s.
One moving story, it was in 1718 that a child of Bach was born and was baptized here in this chapel, and his name was Leopold August Bach. And the two names, Leopold and August, they came from the two godfathers. The one was the prince himself, Leopold, and August, the other godfather, was the brother of Leopold. So they both served as godfathers, but actually it didn't help because this child died weeks after he was baptized. So, which was an ordinary thing in Bach's family. You know, Bach all in all had 20 children, and 10 of them died in childhood. In fact, most of them in their first year of life.
In the summer of 1720, when Bach traveled with Prince Leopold to Karlsbad, his wife Maria Barbara died suddenly and unexpectedly. When Bach returned from the trip 2 months later, he was shocked to learn that Maria had died and long been buried. A year later, soprano Anna Magdalena was hired as the court singer and married to Bach a few months later. Bach met Anna Magdalena, the court singer, here, and they got married really quickly. And
Yeah.
might this be the very place that he might have met Anna?
Yeah, maybe not the court chapel, but somewhere here in the castle, something happened very quickly. What we know is that she turned up at the court in summer 1721. So that was the time when the prince hired her. She was a very young lady, 19 years old. And she obviously was very quickly in a close relationship with Bach, because we know that already in December, which was 4 months later, they both married. So I guess that already in the first weeks of her appearance here at the Curtain Court, the two of them didn't only play music together.
Love at first sight.
That's what it seems to have been. They had 13 children. So I take it for granted that she was a very impressive person. I guess she must have been a beauty. I mean, as the first soprano singer of the court. There was a portrait by Anna Magdalena, which later was in the possession of Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach. So in the catalogue of his estate, it is said that he owned a portrait of Anna Magdalena, and it's just described as Bach, Anna Magdalena, soprano singer, J.S. Bach's second wife, painted in oil by a certain painter named Cristofori. So, and the big question is, where is this portrait now? Is it still existing? Is it somewhere in the world, hanging at the wall and nobody is recognizing who it is? She must have been an impressive singer as well, because we have some of the pieces Bach composed for her, and that's always very elaborated, sophisticated music, wonderful cantatas, and I'm sure you know the famous Notenbüchlein for Anna Magdalena Bach. So the little notebook for Anna Magdalena Bach wrote in the first years of their marriage. And here it's the aria Schlummert ein ihr matten Augen. I'm sure you're familiar with this piece.
From the cantata Ich habe genug.
Genau. This was originally a cantata written for a bass singer or baritone singer. In Leipzig there was no chance for women to perform in the municipal church music. But here, because Anna Magdalena liked Ich habe genug, the cantata, Bach produced a version for soprano. Her favorite piece in the cantata was the aria in the middle, Schlummert ein ihr matten Augen. She copied a reduced version of this aria in the notebook in order to perform it at the harpsichord maybe in the night, and that's Anna Magdalena Bach.
Because this is just a vocal line and a continual line.
Yes, yeah.
And of course, from the clef, we know that it is Anna Magdalena's writing.
Yeah. Which is very similar actually to the style of J.S. Bach. Sometimes it's really hard to distinguish between J.S. Bach's hand and Anna Magdalena's hand because they are looking so similar. So perfect couple, isn't it?
During his time in Köthen, Bach's main responsibility was serving Prince Leopold at the castle. Prince Leopold was a Calvinist. Therefore, Bach only came to the St. Agnes Church, which is a Lutheran church, to receive Holy Communions twice a year. At the time, we also know that the best organ to be found in Köthen was here at the St. Agnes Church. Therefore, although Bach only received 8 Holy Communions throughout his entire time here in Köthen, this church was the church that Bach felt most at home.
Unbelievable.
So this is the Holy Communion cup.
Yes.
From 1705
Yeah.
it's made, and then this is the one that Bach used and partake Holy Communion. And this is the very cup that.
Und seine Frau natürlich.
Yeah.
And his wife.
Yeah. Or his wife, because I mean, first it was Maria Barbara, and then later, because he married again in Köthen,
where he met
Anna Magdalena. And thanks to this Lutheran church in town, Bach had a certain chance, even in Köthen, to re-perform his Weimar cantatas, because there was no option to perform them in the castle, but here in the church, together with many other Lutheran members of the court orchestra, they had the chance to perform these pieces. Like Ich hatte viel Bekümmernis or Mein Herz schwimmt in Blut, all these famous pieces.
Leopold died a few years after Bach departed Köthen for Leipzig. In 1729, Bach returned to Köthen and conducted music for Leopold's funeral. The cantata Klagt Kinder, klagt es alle Welt, which only the libretto survives, was composed specifically for this event. So this is where Prince Leopold is buried.
In the background you see at the left the sarcophagus of his mother, at the right the sarcophagus of the Amusa princess.
So then, where is Prince Leopold's coffin?
You stand right next to his coffin.
And this is
the one.
Leopold.
Yes.
Which is a rather plain coffin, isn't it? There was no money left for him, or what's the reason?
Bach was hired for the funeral. He was hiring 60 musicians. He was writing an exclusive piece of music. The church was decorated with black velvet. There was a lot of luxurious carriages. There was a funeral meal. So that was not the biggest thing in the account. So we have the opinion now that because of the faith of Leopold, because he was a Calvinist, and Calvinist means simple, being simple, sola fide, only the believing, only the faith. And so he was suffering his whole life. He was suffering from this heart failure. He was suffering from all the other diseases he had. He died with 34. He tried a lot of cures to manage these diseases. So he learned from the suffering being a believer. Bach knew there will be a time when Leopold would be bankrupt. He knew he was really sick, and so he wanted to take care for his family.
Yeah,
so
that was one of the main reasons. I mean, he had a growing family.
Yes.
So, and his sons already were teenagers, and Leipzig provided much more opportunities for their education.
Bach departed Köthen for Leipzig when he became the Thomaskantor in 1723. The position as the music director of the famous St. Thomas Boys Choir is extremely busy and challenging, especially during Bach's time. In addition to providing music for the 4 Lutheran churches in the city, Bach was responsible to teach general subjects and music at the St. Thomas School and provide music for all the city's official occasions.
So David, we are now here in the historic Leipzig Town Hall, which was built in 16th century, and we are now going into the room where the ordinary meetings of the Leipzig Town Council took place. That's this room here. So much of the furniture is still 17th, 18th century. And look, that's the desk where the town council was sitting, negotiating all the important things for the city. And here on the table there's a very famous sheet of paper strongly related to J.S. Bach, because it was right here when in 1723 Bach was invited to the meeting of the town council to sign his contract as Thomaskantor. This is the last page, signed by him with his seal, and he had to swear that he has to deal with the boys of the choir and the school properly, that he don't punish them too much. That's actually written. Another thing which was said in the contract is that he has to ask the mayor himself if he want to travel away. And for me, the most surprising thing is that all these things related to his music, to his job as a composer, are not really relevant here in the contract.
The St. Thomas School is one of the oldest schools in the world. It was founded along with the St. Thomas Church in the early 13th century. Bach used to teach here for almost 30 years as part of his duty as the Thomaskantor in Leipzig. The St. Thomas School was founded more than 800 years ago in the year 1212. The original location of the St. Thomas School was right next to the St. Thomas Church, but in the 1870s, the school moved to this building, which is about 15 minutes walking distance from the St. Thomas Church. The St. Thomas School's boys' choirs is one of the most famous choirs in the world today. We are only minutes away from their daily rehearsal. Join me as we observe their preparation for the upcoming performance. The St. Thomas School has a long list of notable alumni. Among them are opera composers Richard Wagner and Reinhard Kaiser, and many of Bach's children such as Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, Wilhelm Friedemann Bach, and Johann Christian Bach, among others. There are currently about 90 students enrolled at the St. Thomas School, and their age are between 9 and 18 years old. Every day, the boys will meet here in this rehearsal room, rehearsing Bach's cantatas as well as works by other composers. Behind me are paintings of some of the former Thomaskantor, and of course, in the center is Johann Sebastian Bach himself. So here we have a new building that was not here during Bach's time, next to the St. Thomas Church.
Built in 1904.
This is the exact location where the St. Thomas School used to be.
Yes. It doesn't exist anymore because the church wanted to have a new building in early 20th century, so they demolished the old one. But the good thing, David, is we have the chance to at least get an impression how the St. Thomas School, including Bach's apartment, looks like. Here we have a model of the St. Thomas School, which was originally built in 16th century. In the beginning it was only a building of 3 floors, and then later they added more floors. We not only had the school for the 54 boarders and all the other students, all in all about 200 students.
So we see that Bach's apartment is down here,
Yeah.
and then up here we see many beds, so this belongs to the students.
Look, Bach's composing study,
Right.
the place where he created all this amazing music, was with a window into this direction. So he was looking straight to the river Pleiße, very charming, and some parks behind it. So that's what Bach saw when he composed St. Matthew Passion or pieces like this. But on the other hand, it must have been extremely noisy.
Many accomplished musicians were once a member of the St. Thomas Boys Choir. Among them is award-winning tenor Wolfram Latka, who has performed in more than 50 countries in recent years.
When Bach came to that choir, the choir already existed for 500 years.
Yes.
It had famous composers being part of that history. I mean, you sing Bach every week, almost every day actually. And it gives you an education that you cannot get anywhere else. And you have experience being on stage. And I didn't realize it when I was a boy, how much it influenced me. Having been for so long in that choir and in that surroundings, and now I'm back since some years singing as a soloist, and I am very, very grateful for everything that happened, and it helped me. I mean, when you talk about the distinction between singing in a choir and singing as a soloist, and you know that people want to put that apart, no, and I think you should have the tools to use if you're really, really a professionalist.
And I'm hearing that singing in a choir or growing up in a choir has helped you tremendously for your soloist career.
Absolutely.
My father used to be in the St. Thomas Boys Choir. Leipzig and the St. Thomas Boys Choir has always been very close to me as a child. And then one day, this St. Thomas Boys Choir came to Munich, and I was very excited to see them. And we were supposed to be meeting one of the boys to show them around the city, because that boy was the son of one of my father's friends from the choir. And I was very disappointed because it wasn't actually a boy, it was almost a man. I think he was 17. A good decade later, that disappointment went away, and that person became my husband. So we had a boy who is now 12 years old, and he is in the choir. I found this very old score, and it had my name on it, which is not my maiden name, and it's an old score, so it's not my score, it's actually my husband's score. And he had been using it apparently when he was in the choir. And then when I opened the soprano duet that I will be singing today, I found markings in it that must have been from my husband's voice teacher back then. So apparently he studied this or sang it in public back when he was in the choir, and his voice teacher was actually Gotthold Schwarz back then, who is now conducting the choir.
The St. Thomas Church in Leipzig was built in the 12th century. It is a significant historical venue for many reasons. Martin Luther preached here in 1539 and introduced the Reformation to Leipzig. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart played the organ here in 1789. The opera composer Richard Wagner was baptized here in 1813, and Felix Mendelssohn conducted the Leipzig's revival of St. Matthew Passion here in 1841. But above all, the St. Thomas Church is the primary venue for all pilgrimages of Johann Sebastian Bach, as he served here as the Thomaskantor for almost 30 years, starting in 1723. In the last 27 years of his life, Johann Sebastian Bach spent much of his time composing and performing here at the St. Thomas Church. Many important works such as the St. Matthew Passion, Magnificat, as well as numerous cantatas were first conceived, composed, and performed at this church. For many years, the St. Thomas Church served not only the center of worship, but also the center of music for the city of Leipzig.
And second half of his life he spent here in Leipzig, and I mean, this is the place where Bach almost every day of his Leipzig life spent and worked, performed. But here in St. Thomas Church, I mean, that's the place next to his apartment where the name of the choir came from, and the choir still exists. Today, many churches we used to perform the music down in the church, so close to the altar. But during Bach's time, it was quite common that the performances took place up at the choir loft.
So it's kind of like sounding like the sound coming from heaven.
From heaven, that's it.
Angels.
Yeah, it's the sound of the angels. And people have to look into the other direction, to the cross, to Jesus, and just enjoying the sound, not seeing what's going on up on the choir loft.
The interior of the St. Thomas Church was quite different during Bach's time in comparison to what we see today. The two existing organs were built years after Bach was gone, and the choir loft was much smaller and quite different from the one in present day. What the organ was like when Bach was here, so obviously it's not one of these two organs. None of these were here.
We know what organs he had in this church, but we don't know how the organs look. We have not a painting or a drawing of the organ, just a description in words. It was at the gallery, and we know it was not so big, some 30 stops, but very old. In Bach's time it was 150 years old. This organ here, we call it Bach Organ. It's built in 2000 by Gerald Wöhl in Baroque style, and it looks not so big, but it is big. It is 60-stop organ. The big Baroque organ in Naumburg has 54 stops. This has 60 stops. And the other organ at the West Gallery, it's built by Wilhelm Sauer in 1889 with pneumatic action. Romantic instrument for romantic music, Reger, Cäsar Franck, Reinberger, Liszt.
So, Mikhail, here we are in the choir loft of the St. Thomas Church, and this is quite a large space. Did Bach have this space during his time here at the St. Thomas Church?
Actually, this choir loft situation today is mainly based on a renovation they did in the 19th century. Before, during Bach's time, there was a choir loft, which was a little smaller, and there were two levels. The level down was for the choir, and there was an upper level that was for the town musicians. The walls of the church are still the same, and the pillars. But the interior during Bach's time was quite different. We had not the stone gallery on the northern side and at the south side. We had two levels of galleries made of wood. Yeah, and they were not open like now, they were closed. So there was a window in front. These were actually lofts for the rich people.
I'm seeing that going to the front of the church. It seems to me that this is not quite symmetrical, and it's kind of leaning to the left a little bit. Is that right? Was it a mistake? Or
You are totally right, and there are two explanations. My favorite explanation is that this has something to do with the cross. Look, there's the crucifix up there, and you know that Jesus at the crucifix, when he died, his head moved to the left side. The other explanation is that they just did a bad job when they extended the church in the medieval time.
Our understanding of a typical Sunday worship service and the ways we listen to a performance of Bach's cantata, even at the St. Thomas Church today, are very different from what the congregation had experienced during Bach's time.
The service during Bach's time, Sunday morning service, took almost 4 hours. So today we are talking about maybe 60 minutes, 1 hour or one and a half hour. Some people only showed up for the sermon, or others went out of the church during the sermon. Some of them used to read the newspaper in the service, slept for a while. Some of the people only show up to listen to the music, others avoided the music. So in other words, a wide variety of behavior. All the Thomaskantors, starting in late 17th century and in entire 18th century, used to print the text of their cantatas to make the text accessible to the congregation. This little book, it's a common problem that sometimes you can't understand the text when a soprano or a tenor is singing.
Even for native German, even during Bach's time.
Even in Bach's time, what we know is that Bach himself, for Ordinary Sunday, planned to sell something like 600 copies of his cantata text. So in other words, he expected a lot of people who really want to buy this to learn more about the text of his cantata. So in other words, there must be a large audience which was focused on his church music.
Bach's earliest survived cantata dates all the way back to 1707, a work which he performed on Easter as part of his application to a church position in Mühlhausen. Later on, he composed several cantatas while he was working as the court musician in Weimar. But most of his cantatas were produced during his first years in Leipzig, starting in 1723. Most of Bach's survived cantatas are sacred in nature. Each week, he composed a new cantata for the Sunday worship service according to the events in the church calendar, as well as the particular readings of the Bible. Bach composed more than 1,000 works throughout his life, and among them about 200 cantatas came down to us. And here we are at the Bach-Archiv in Leipzig, and in the library they own the manuscript to all the chorale cantatas and some of the most important documents written during Bach's lifetime. Join me now as we visit the library at the Bach-Archiv in Leipzig. Today, I will be meeting with Dr. Manuel Bärwald, a Bach scholar and researcher at the Bach-Archiv in Leipzig, and together we will be looking at some original manuscripts of Bach's cantatas. I have many questions to ask him, and the first one would be, how did Bach manage to compose and perform a new cantata each week?
For every week he composed a new cantata, so we have to imagine when he came back from church service on Sunday, he sat down at his desk and wrote down, started composing a new cantata, which maybe took him until Tuesday, and at the latest, I think on Wednesday, the performance parts had to be produced because these pieces had to be rehearsed, and on Sunday there was the next performance. So,
but also wondering, would it be the case that maybe there were several cantatas, the several projects going on at the same time? Would that be possible?
I don't think this is possible, especially for the chorale cantata cycle, because there was, as far as we see, no time to compose cantatas ahead because the schedule was so tight.
With Bach's hectic schedule and having to produce a new cantata every week, how did he keep up with the pace? And, does he always write his own music, or we imagine that he would have some help with copying out the parts from the full score and all that?
Well, he had the assistance of experienced boys from the St. Thomas Boys Choir, who assisted him copying out the performance parts. This is a cantata for the first Sunday in Advent, composed within the cantata, choral cantata cycle in 1724, Komm der Heiden Heiland.
So this is the original manuscript. This is Bach's handwriting? Do we know?
No, it's not Bach's handwriting. So the performance parts that were used in 1724 for the first performance in the Leipzig churches. And, well, we can look into this manuscript.
So who is the copyist for this one?
His name is Johann Andreas Kuhnau.
Not the Kuhnau, not the predecessor of Bach.
No, it's a nephew of him. He was in the choir and he did a very good job. He has a very clean, big, clear handwriting.
Right.
It's very easy to differentiate his handwriting from Bach's handwriting. And there's another copyist. His name is Christian Gottlob Meissner, from the C-clef here, which is completely different to this C-clef written by Meissner.
The chorus part was written by Kuhnau.
Yes, completely.
And then the recitative was written by Meissner.
Yes. And yes, until the 1940s, 50s, people think this is Bach's handwriting because Meissner tried to write like Bach. This chorale cantata was reperformed in Leipzig, and we know this an additional violone part. And this is actually written by Johann Sebastian Bach himself. We know that it is from the 1730s because it was written of another kind of paper than all the rest of the manuscript. Paper dealers from different paper mills, and they have different watermarks. So the older manuscripts from the year 1724 have a moon, and here in this manuscript you can see an M and an A medium size, which Bach only used in the early 1730s, so around 1732. It's here and it's very hard to see when you go against the light. Well, we have to put it on our screen and then we can see it better. And what is also an indication is Bach's handwriting has changed from during his lifetime, and also from the 1720s to the 1730s and the 1740s. We will see this in other manuscripts, how thick and clumsy his handwriting gets in the later years.
So it got worse and worse.
Yes.
Besides Kuhnau and Meissner, who else helped Bach to copy this music? Did his wife or perhaps his children help him?
Sometimes. So we talked about the reperformance in the 1730s of this cantata. At this time, Bach didn't have these main copyists available because he didn't compose a new cantata every week, so there was no need to have copyists for constant copying of his music. As you can see here, the scribe changes. This is Johann Sebastian Bach, and this is another copyist. You can easily see this from the basso clef, and also the adagio is added by Bach himself, as well as the piano and the forte, but the music was written by someone else, and it is his wife Anna Magdalena. She often did copy work for Bach. For example, she wrote a copy of the violin sonatas, of the violin solos and the cello suites, and one of Bach's private students who owned such a copy added to the title page the information that this manuscript was written by Anna Magdalena Bach. And
so in comparison, so when we compare the manuscript of the cello suite and we compare to the handwriting here, and we know that this for sure was copied by Anna Magdalena.
Yes. This is an autograph by Bach. It's the compositional autograph of Cantata 135.
So how do we know that this was written by Bach now and not his students or not by Anna Magdalena?
Yes. We know it by comparison of his handwriting. So what we have prepared here is a letter or a recommendation letter Bach wrote for one of his students, Johann Christoph Altnicol, and so we see Bach signed this letter. It's an autographed piece of paper.
Famous Bach signature.
Yes. And so, for example, if we compare the letter A of Ach, Herr, mich armen Sünder, and the A of Alt Nicole. It's very much the same.
Martin Luther and Johann Sebastian Bach were born more than 200 years apart, but both of them spent their childhood years in Eisenach, went to the same school, and even sang in the same church choir. Luther's Reformation had a profound and lifelong impact on the young J.S. Bach. One of Luther's most important contributions during the Reformation is the invention of the German chorales, which is very much the root of congregational hymns heard at worship services in churches around the world today. Many of Luther's chorale tunes were adapted into Bach's compositions, such as the organ chorale preludes as well as many of his chorale cantatas.
Well, in this room we try to reconstruct Bach's library. At the end of his life, Bach had a vast theological library, 52 titles in 81 volumes. And for the past 10 years we've tried to reconstruct that library. With the information given in the estate, we can pinpoint each title to an edition that was published during Bach's lifetime. Almost a quarter of his library is works by Martin Luther. We have the Jena edition and the Altenburg complete edition of the works of Martin Luther. Also one book from the Wittenberg edition, it's the Psalm volume, the Table Talks, the Hauspostille in 2 versions. We have lots of sermons, and that's another quarter of the library. And we can imagine that Bach used these sermons for the preparation of his cantatas, because a sermon is nothing else than interpreting a particular piece from the scripture that is read at this Sunday in church, and the church music was another explanation of the same part of the scripture that was read at that Sunday in church. So when Bach prepared his cantatas, he would have had, we know that from the estate, a large trove of literature that he owned privately. I mean, think of that, owning so many books. He was sitting in his composing room in Leipzig. He had the library of St. Thomas just next door, literally next door. It was adjacent to his workroom. So, but instead, he bought himself from his hard-earned money 52 expensive volumes of theological literature.
Not only did Luther insisted on using the vernacular in liturgy and congregational singing, but he also intended to make the Bible more accessible to the people across the entire Germany. Although there were already several German versions of the Bible prior to Luther's time, they were all translated from the Latin Vulgate, rather than the original Hebrew and Greek. Therefore, while Luther was sequestering himself at the Wartburg Castle from the persecution of the Catholic Church, he began translating the Bible. The Luther Bible became so widespread that it actually unified the German language as we know it, and continues to be the most widely used German Bible today. Martin Luther was excommunicated by the church. He found refuge here at the Wartburg Castle, and this is the very room where he translated the New Testament Bible from Greek into German. 1724 is exactly 200 years after the publication of the first Lutheran hymnals. It was also Bach's second year in Leipzig, when his cantatas were composed based on the melody and text of pre-existing Lutheran hymns, also known as chorales. The complete original performance parts of these chorale cantatas are still kept in Leipzig today.
This cycle was the most successful cycle Bach composed in Leipzig. I guess because he was dealing with these familiar melodies, these church hymns, everybody knew. The people liked to hear these pieces, so familiar melodies combined with Bach's sophisticated art of composing. I have several hints that Bach performed this cycle not only in 1724, 1725 when the cycle was composed, but also in the 1730s and 40s again and again, maybe 3 or 4 times. I'm quite sure that it was not by accident that Anna Magdalena took the original performing parts of this cycle and gave it as a gift to the St. Thomas School, because that was the cycle even the boys from St. Thomas School liked much more than all the other cantatas. In 1736, this anonymous person visited several places in central Germany, several courts, and also a city. And this city is described as the most important university city in central Germany. And then the guy is talking about the musicians there. And in the last sentences of this part of the report, he is saying, yeah, and there's the head of the musicians in this university town, and he could be the best musician in Germany and in the world if his works are not against nature and turgid. So he's explaining that this composer is able to play amazingly quick and sophisticated on the organ, but he thinks that his singers are able to sing what he is playing on the organ. But this is impossible, that's what the guy is saying. And therefore his cantatas are not natural, they are turgid, bad in style, so in other words, rubbish. And he is obviously talking about J.S. Bach. I like very much in this description how Bach is described as a conductor of church music, feeling the rhythm in any of his bones, moving the head, the finger, stomping the feet, helping everybody with his voice. They had to find a way to come through with the entire piece in the service. And it makes sense to have a guy like him being everywhere, taking care for everything and making sure that they will start and end at the same time.
So we know that in addition to the St. Thomas Church, Bach also had to provide music for 3 other churches, and the second church would be the St. Nicholas Church, which is where we are now.
Yes, you're right. And actually, Bach was in charge for the church music in the 4 Leipzig churches, but his own work was mainly concentrated on the 2 main churches, which was St. Thomas, so at western end of the city, and St. Nicholas at the eastern end. And the one Sunday he performed his cantata with the best 16 boys of the St. Thomas choir in St. Nicholas Church, other Sunday at St. Thomas.
So they rotate?
They rotated. So and actually 50% of Bach's Leipzig pieces were actually premiered in St. Nicholas Church, and the most important ones, or the most famous ones, are first cantata of Christmas Oratorio, which was Christmas Day 1734. So the famous Jauchze-Frohlocket was played for the very first time here in this church. And St. John Passion in 1724. This church is completely different from St. Thomas.
Right.
So the colors are white, and then you have these palms. They did a big renovation in the 1780s, so the walls are still the same, but all the interior, the architecture inside is from late 18th century. So in other words, Bach never saw St. Nicholas Church in such a condition. But the space is still the same. So that's the largest organ in entire Saxony.
Wow.
Built in 19th century and was renovated very recently. It wouldn't work to perform a piece like St. John Passion or Bach cantata up at the choir loft, there's not enough space. And this is something which already was the problem during Bach's time. But the choir loft during Bach's time was not in the middle of the church. It was slightly on the left side, and the organ itself was actually completely in the left corner of the church.
Okay, so it's coming from one side of the church instead of in the St. Thomas Church where it was coming from the center.
Yeah. It's not by accident that Bach wanted to have his premiere performance of St. John Passion in St. Thomas Church. That's how he announced the performance. Right. And then the Leipzig Town Council said, no, we have rules, and that means alternating system. 1 year the Passion music, Good Friday at St. Thomas, out of
the next year would be
St. Nicholas. In 1724 it was for St. Nicholas. But he definitely preferred St. Thomas for the large-scale works. And it's not by accident that a piece like St. Matthew Passion, where you need much more singers, the two orchestras and the two choirs, was obviously always performed in St. Thomas.
It was here at this place. There was a little gallery with the organ, and it's called Schweiben Nest, and this is the swallow nest, Schwalben Nest organ at this place, and it's famous because in the performance of the Matthew's Passion, the Cantus Firmus O Lamm Gottes unschuldig performed at this organ. We know this because in Bach's score is written with red ink, Rückpositiv sesquialtera. It's a registration of the organ, and only this organ had Rückpositiv sesquialtera, not this.
I see.
Yes.
So the pianists, they were standing right here with
I
the
think
organ.
only the organist and maybe 4 boys for the Cantus Firmus. Not more room was there, and the orchestra 1 and 2 and the choirs were at the West Gallery.
So it's kind of like a Cori Spezzati kind of.
Yes, it's 40 meters distance.
Yeah, that must have been a challenge, maybe. We don't
Challenge,
know.
but I think it was very impressive, the sound in this big room. Yes, I think so.
So the 2 organs were playing simultaneously during the St. Matthew Passion then?
Yes, for the first chorus and for maybe for O Mensch, beweine dein Sünde groß.
The ending of the first part of the St. Matthew
yes.
Passion.
This piece, 2 pieces.
Sweet
course, the passions are amazing. I can't think of another example of this thin line between, being really in the scenery and also trying to be outside the choirs. They are the choruses. They are right in the scenery. If they have the chorus, but the chorals are reflecting on it or are feeling with
the believers.
Yes, and then you have the reflection in the areas and the evangelist right in the middle. I find that really perfect.
I sang them very often, quite often. The St. John and St. Matthew's Passion, 20, 30 times St. Matthew and maybe 40 times St. John at the moment. I never get tired during the piece. That's maybe a difference to some other composers, but Bach, he never tires me. He's always attracting, and there are always new things popping out and coming to my attention. A special place in the Passion, of course, where Peter is weeping about what he has done, and then I'm singing this aria, and then there's a chorale afterwards, which also comments on this. I really can't find any words for it because it's so marvelous.
Around the time when Bach was here, it was the center of commercial, center of trading, center of fashion, and center of everything, basically.
Yeah, some people met at the coffee houses, not only listened to music there, but were trading, were gambling, there also was prostitution, there was everything.
So we know Bach loves coffee a lot.
Yes, he composed the coffee cantata.
Yes, it was performed in a coffee house.
In a coffee house, not in this coffee house, but in the Zimmermann's coffee house.
So this is the location where the Zimmermann Cafe House used to be?
Yes, this is exactly the place where the building was standing and where Bach from 1729 until the early 1740s performed regularly every week with the Collegium Musicum, so with an orchestra of students from the university.
And it's just a few steps from the Outer Rathaus, which is the city center.
Yes, it's absolutely close, and from here it's maybe 5 minutes to the Thomasschule where Bach lived.
And I know that Collegium Musicum was founded by Telemann in 1701,
yes,
who, by the way, was also competitors of Bach when they were applying for the job for Thomaskantor.
The Collegium Musicum was founded by Telemann in 1701, and it was closely connected to the music directorship of the Neue Kirche. So Telemann was a music director at the Neue Kirche, and his successors were also director of the Collegium Musicum, and this rule changed in 1729 Then Bach took over the directorship at a time when his focus shifted away from composing cantatas, new cantatas every week, and when he was looking for new musical challenges.
From many letters and accounts, we learn that Bach was not always very happy with how things turned out. Indeed, he did not get along with some of the city council members and has made multiple complaints regarding his employment.
If there is any bad guy in Bach's biography, then it was this guy. This is Christian Ludwig Stieglitz, so one member of the Leipzig Town Council, later an important Leipzig mayor, and he was the guy who changed the rules in 1729 concerning the musical entrance exam of all the boys of St. Thomas.
That's the
choir.
one where Bach no longer have the authority to choose the students that he wants.
Yeah, totally right. And he didn't have any sense for music. He was constantly complaining about Bach in the town council meetings, coming up with sentences like, "This cantor doesn't do anything, he is horrible."
We have to say that Bach was not the best employee in the world. I think he would also today have difficulties. He was sometimes stubborn.
Yeah. He was an artist.
He was an artist and he was very proud on his rights. We have to see both sides. Bach did not everything right, and have a look on Telemann, he was more smooth. Or if you think on Mendelssohn, who was always in best terms to the Leipzig Town Council, was a personal friend of every of these people. Bach had a share in his problems here.
Bach was really thinking about leaving Leipzig. He wrote this famous letter to an old schoolmate, Georg Erdmann, who was a Russian ambassador in Danzig, asking him if he knows something about a vacancy of an important church music position in Danzig. August the Strong, Prince of Saxony, died.
Right.
And his son became the new one. So, and Bach prepared as a special gift for the new prince the Kyrie and Gloria of the later B minor Mass. And that was not only intended as a gift. The real reason for Bach was that he wanted to combine this gift with the application to get an official title at the Dresden court orchestra. In case he get this title, he was protected by the prince himself.
This is Johann Gottfried Reiche, Bach's first trumpet player.
He is the highest ranking town musician.
Yes. So many speculations around this round trumpet.
So what do we call it?
We don't know. Some people say it's a kind of a corno da caccia, but it is. Many people say it's actually a trumpet in a round
an
form.
ongoing discussion
It's
for
an ongoing
decades.
discussion. We don't know whether this instrument really existed. So, in what sense? It's not a valve trumpet. It's also not a slide trumpet. So we have a reconstruction here by Friedbert Züre, but we don't know whether it works.
And a poor guy, in a way that he was the one who had to premiere all these pieces Bach composed in the 1720s and 30s. So, I mean, look, pieces like Christmas Oratorio. He was considered as one of the best trumpet players, at least in Saxony. But here's the funny story. He died maybe because of Bach's music. Because when the Bachsche Collegium Musicum performed a congratulation cantata for the Saxon prince who was in town. I think it was in the night itself or the morning after. They found him on the street, so he died suddenly. And
by a stroke.
By a stroke. And it was written in the newspaper. But some people said that was because the music the night before was so exhausting for him, and that was a score by Bach.
It was President Glücke, Gesegnete Sachsen.
You're right.
Very heavy piece. But to be fair, to Bach. He was over 70. He was an old man because they had no retirement option. There was no pension system, so he played. Everybody played until the death knocked on his door. We have some compositions of him, 24 Quattrice Jr. from the late 17th century, and that is not of Bach's quality, but it's really major music, wonderful 4-part music for 3 trombones and 1 cornetto, which was the daily life instrumentation of the Leipzig town musicians. So they played from the balcony of that building. So they played from every day at 10 o'clock at a hora decima. they stood on the balcony and they played for the people there a chorale or one of his sonatas. So this is really
there was always a lot of music going on in
inside
18th century Leipzig. Remember, they had these music from the town pipers, down from the town hall. There were the boys from St. Thomas going through the streets, singing in order to collect money.
It is the musicians' loft. It's a special gallery where the town musicians had to stand and play music when this room has been used for state ceremonies, for weddings, for ceremonies of the guilds and all these things. And we can assume that Johann Gottfried Reich, Kaspar Heinrich Gleditsch and all these other town musicians stood there and played their music, trombones, cornettos, probably violins. And outside the building is a huge balcony, and it has been used for the daily playing of a sonata or a chorale. So that's really a music place here in the old town hall.
The instruments during Bach's time are quite different from the orchestral instruments as we know them today. The modern flute, for example, is made of metal, but the Baroque flute, along with the Baroque oboe and bassoon, are made entirely of wood. The natural trumpet is the most commonly used brass instrument in Bach's compositions. The natural trumpet does not have vowels, and therefore, even though the length of its tube is twice as long as the modern trumpet, it is only able to play the note of the harmonic series, which usually lingers on the higher register and is extremely challenging to play. As for the Baroque strings instruments, gut strings are used instead of the metal strings, and the bows are much shorter than the modern ones. In addition, chin rest and shoulder rest were only invented in the 19th and 20th century. Therefore, not only do Baroque instruments look and sound differently from the modern ones, but their playing techniques and styles are also quite distinguishable.
So David, follow me to a room.
Oh my.
Come on.
Okay.
Full with instruments from Bach's Leipzig period. And actually my favorite here is this double bass, a very massive instrument which has a very, very long Leipzig story. It was bought in the middle of 17th century, I guess in the 1670s in Prague. It was used in St. Nicholas Church here in Leipzig for more than a century. So in other words, I guess this is an instrument which took part in the premiere performance of St. John Passion, of many of Bach's cantatas.
So here we have a smaller version. It's a violin d'amore.
Yeah, that's a violin d'amore. You know that Bach liked this kind of instrument because of its very sensitive sound. You know, some really impressive arias by Bach where he used this instrument.
The duet in St. John Passion, Erwäge. Actually, my most favorite one is the Arioso, Betrachte meine Seele.
Most of these instruments were built by the Leipzig violin builder Hoffmann. Bach used to buy his instruments from Hoffmann, so he acquired many new instruments in the late 1720s.
I heard there's some wind instruments were only famous during Bach's time and for Bach's work, and you don't see them very much in other compositions. Is that right?
That's right, and maybe the most famous one is the oboe da caccia.
Yeah.
So the oboe built for the hunt. Yeah. So and it has a very, very special wooden sound. You know that Bach used it very often in his passions and his cantatas. Some scholars argued that Bach himself actually invented the instrument.
Right.
I'm not quite sure about this.
Have we seen any of this instrumentation, for this particular instruments in other composers' works?
Yeah, there are evidences that other composers, contemporary composers, used it. A Leipzig oboe builder, Johannes Eichentopf, invented the instrument in the early 1720s, and the big question is, did Bach stimulate him to invent this, or was it more or less by accident that Bach came across this invention by Eichentopf, loved the instrument, and started composing for it pieces on a regular basis in his cantatas? That's something we don't know for sure. So,
and then of course nowadays we replace that when we use a modern instrument, we play it on an English one.
Yeah.
Just a different instrument.
Yeah, it's definitely a different instrument. So the sound of an original oboe da caccia is very special.
Today we see musical ensembles of all sizes all around the world performing Bach's music. But what was the exact size of a Bach choir or Bach orchestra? And did Bach have an ideal number of instrumentalists and singers that he would like in his group? Back at Bach-Archiv Leipzig, Dr. Manuel Bärwald and I are looking at the original performing part of a Bach cantata, as well as an important document written by Bach himself in regards of the performance practice of his music.
Well, we can look into this manuscript.
So this is very different from our modern vocal score, where we can always see 4 parts going on at the same time in a vocal score, but at the time there's just one specific part written for soprano and then one for the alto I see here.
Yes, all the singers could only see what's going on in the music in their own part, and they cannot see what the instruments are doing or the other vocal.
Now what is so fascinating to me is that both the chorus and the solo part is written on the same piece of paper. So that tells me that the soloists also sing in the choir.
Yes, they did.
And then my understanding is that we only have one copy of the tenor part, of each part.
Sometimes the violins are doubled, and then we have
duplicate.
Yes.
Okay.
We have duplicates, but never for the vocal parts.
Is it possible that, like some scholar, they have said that Bach cantata they perform one singer per part?
Well,
because we only have one vocal part.
Well, this is possible, but it's not like Bach intended his music to be played and sung.
How do we know Bach's intention?
So he wrote a letter to the Leipzig town council and explains very detailed how many musicians he needs to perform a proper church music. So it's called Kurzer, jedoch höchst nötiger Entwurf einer wohlbestallten Kirchenmusik. So short but most necessary draft on how church music should be performed. In every choir there should be at least 3 sopranos, 3 altos, 3 tenors, and as much basses.
So 3 basses, basically.
It
says 2 to 3 first violin.
First violins, 2 to 3 second violins, 2 violas, 2 violoncello, 1 violone, 2 oboes, 1 or 2 bassoon, 3 trumpets,
and 1 timpani.
Yes.
So when a piece that's without trumpet and timpani, so we're talking about, with the continuo player or Bach himself playing at the keyboard, then the orchestra is as big as 15 people.
Yes.
So maybe on a feast day when there's a timpani and then there's the trumpet. So the Bach's orchestra, it would be safe for us to say that around 18 to 20 people, not more than 20 people.
Absolutely, yes.
So singers-wise, if it says that ideally is 3, yet better, yet 4 people.
Yes.
Right? So then that would be
12 to 16, yes.
So the entire group would be, we're talking about a little bit more than 30 people.
Yes. And the choir couldn't be much bigger because there were 55 singers in the St. Thomas Boys choir, and they not only have to perform on Sundays in one church, they have to perform in St. Thomas Church and St. Nicholas Church, and New Church and St. Peter's at the same time.
And then we know that back then people get sick very often.
Especially in the winter.
That's why he wrote that letter, because it is in his ideal world, practically not in the real world. Probably sometimes he end up with 2 singers per part, or maybe even 1 on some Sunday.
Yes.
Today, there are more historical informed performances of Bach's music than ever. The numbers of early music ensembles from around the world are rising, and each are trying to recreate what they think is closest to the performance practice at the time by using period instruments and smaller performing forces. On the other hand, many people are more familiar with Bach's masterworks being performed by a symphonic choir and large orchestra, a tradition which probably dates all the way back to 1829, when Mendelssohn revived Bach's St. Matthew Passion in Berlin. Usually when we go to concert hall today and see this concert and Bach is being performed by a large orchestra with a large choir, and this tradition really did not come from Bach himself, but came from the revival during Mendelssohn's time.
The 19th century was a time of, dreaming and of creating these idols, these heroic figures. Like Beethoven was another one. He was really kind of put on this pedestal, and that's why Brahms didn't even compose a symphony for such a long time, because he didn't even feel like he could possibly get close to what Beethoven did, because everybody was putting them so high up. And that's kind of what they did with Bach. They put him so high up as this master, which we kind of still do today, and there's good reason for it. But I think that probably influenced also the performance practice, this whole idea of really putting somebody up on a pedestal. So maybe you added more singers than Bach maybe even had the means of having, but maybe he didn't even envision it like that. But it makes for such a almost kind of a religious effect of having this big mass of people singing. Whether that will stay, we don't know. It could be that we change gears.
Where we're seeing that Bach is performed by less and less people, and even maybe 1 instrument and 1 singers per part.
Right.
But still, I think it's very meaningful for a big group of people coming together just to experience Bach by performing it. I think that is another way to appreciate Bach, although it might not have been what Bach would have intended to be.
Well, but in the end, is that the most important thing? Because, Schumann definitely said, the most important thing is to do it the way that the composer intended. But on the other hand...
Well, he was playing Bach on the piano,
yes,
which didn't exist during Bach's lifetime.
And he was enjoying Bach in his way, and other people enjoy Bach in their way. So I think that's it's valid either way if you're appreciating his music.
In the middle of the 19th century, there was a surge of interest in early music. Instead of only performing music by living composers, musicians often include music from the past into their concert programs. Among the pioneers of the early music revival, Robert and Clara Schumann, and particularly Felix Mendelssohn, were very fond of Bach's music. They were among the first to bring Bach's works into the concert halls and started Bach revival, which lasts through this day. Although Mendelssohn only lived here in Leipzig for several years, he was the music director of the Gewandhaus Orchestra. In addition, along with Clara and Robert Schumann, they were studying and performing Bach's music, trying to reintroduce Bach's music to a wider audience. Behind me here, this is the apartment where Felix Mendelssohn used to live right before his death. Mendelssohn moved to Leipzig in 1835 and became the music director of the Gewandhaus Orchestra. At the same time, he also had regular engagements with the Opera House, the St. Thomas Boys Choir, and other music institutions in the city. In addition to his conducting and composing duties, he also performed frequently as a soloist in various concerts around Europe. This was Mendelssohn's third and last apartment in Leipzig, where he lived for 2 years from 1845 until his death in 1847.
In the 19th century, Felix Mendelssohn Bartholdy lived here in this house, and this room, this size of rooms, was common to play chamber music in this time. The Quarto Opus 80 from Mendelssohn was composed at the studies room at the end of the hall, and then the first performance was here, in this room. Johann Sebastian Bach was here in Leipzig for 27 years. Yeah. After his death in 1750, he was forgotten. It was the same like Handel or Gluck or other from this time. Again, it was common to play contemporary composers. And Mendelssohn done the first public performance of St. Matthew Passion in 1829 in Berlin.
With the Berlin Sing Academy?
With the Berlin Sing Academy. Right. Mendelssohn in the age of 20. This first performance in Berlin, yes, it was a local event that had no attention over the border of Berlin. The second performance of St. Matthew Passion under the conducting von Felix Mendelssohn Bartholdy were here in Leipzig, in St. Thomas Church in 1842. And this started the Bach Renaissance in the whole Europe.
When Mendelssohn was 16 years old, his grandmother Bella Solomon gave him a manuscript copy of Bach's masterpiece, St. Matthew Passion. 4 years later, in 1829, with the support of his music teacher Friedrich Zelter, the 20-year-old Mendelssohn conducted the revival performance of the Passion in Berlin and started the ever-growing Bach revival, which continues through this day. While Mendelssohn was in Leipzig, he and his sister Fanny Mendelssohn, along with their friends Robert and Clara Schumann, have organized and performed in many salon concerts at his apartment. Musician and historian Christian Schmidt will be showing us around the Mendelssohn-Haus, starting with the music salon.
Such famous people like Robert Schumann, his wife Clara Wieck, Richard Wagner was as guest here, Louis Spohr and many others, publishers from Leipzig. Jenny Lind, Mendelssohn's favorite soprano singer, yes. She sang many of Mendelssohn's lieder here in this music salon. And so they installed, we say, abendliche musikalische Unterhaltungen or the Sunday concerts at 10:30. So they met here for music and to talk to each other, to discuss latest fashion.
So we know that there's a strong connection between the Schumanns, the Mendelssohn, to Johann Sebastian Bach. So do you think that Bach music would have played in this room during Mendelssohn's lifetime?
So when the friend circle met here for music, of course they played not only contemporary music, but also music by Johann Sebastian Bach, because Mendelssohn loved that music so much, and he wanted to give all his friends that wonderful pleasure to hear this music. Here we are in Felix Mendelssohn-Bartholdy's study. In this small room he created so great music, like his second oratorio Elijah, or his second piano trio Opus 66, or that wonderful string quartet in F minor. The watercolors are by Felix Mendelssohn-Bartholdy. He drew sketches and painted watercolors wherever he was. He was not known as a painter, it was his hobby, you can say.
But this is by no means an amateur work.
You're right. Today we have our mobile phones and take photos. He drew sketches and painted those watercolors. Yeah, it's astonishing. He was so talented, multi-talented.
Mendelssohn and Fanny, they often have conversation on Bach's music.
That's so nice to read the letters between the two when they speak about Bach and his music, and the old Bach, he found this idea, isn't that wonderful? And yeah, so they talked to each other about Bach's music, and so of course they brought in their love to Bach's music into their own compositions, into their own works.
Not only Felix Mendelssohn and his sister Fanny shared their loves for Bach through exchanging of letters, Robert and Clara Schumann also had similar exchange on studying Bach's music in their marriage diary. Behind me is the Schumann-Haus. It is the place where Robert and Clara Schumann have lived in the 1840s. Both of them were huge fans of Johann Sebastian Bach. Join me now and take a look at their house.
So this room that we're standing in was the room where a lot of family and friends would gather, and the Schumanns kind of became this like magnet for anyone who was interested in the newest music currents going on. They would come here, they would play pieces either that they composed, like Mendelssohn would come here very often and play his music, or they would talk about different music. They would also play Bach. So Clara Wieck, even as a girl before she was married, her father had her play fugues by Bach, and studying them, she studied counterpoint with the Thomaskantor at the time.
So they have a connection with the St. Thomas Church too?
Yes, definitely they do. And then when she got to know Robert Schumann, she got to know somebody who was also already a Bach lover, somebody who really wanted to also educate the audiences what Bach's music is about. They moved in here to this apartment after fighting for several years just to get permission to marry, and during the second week they decided to systematically study the Well-Tempered Klavier by Bach. This is the marriage diary in German, the Ehetagebücher, which is now published. I don't know what the couple would have thought about that, but in any case for us it's very fascinating, because the first 4 years that they were married, that they lived here in Leipzig together, they would take turns every week and write about what happened in their time here. And they write here on the 21st of September, 1840. This is the second week of their marriage. This is Clara Schumann writing. So far I haven't been really industrious, but today I arose with the best intentions. We have started with the fugues of Bach. Robert marks those places where the theme always returns. Studying these fugues is really quite interesting and gives me more pleasure each day. Robert reprimanded me very strongly. I had doubled one place in octaves and thus impermissibly added a fifth voice to the four-voice texture. He was right to denounce this, but it pained me not to have sensed it myself. So they were studying it together, and 5 years later they also studied Bach again, and Robert Schumann composed his Opus 60, the fugues on the name Bach, B-A-C-H.
Right.
Yeah. So that was kind of a product of their study together.
How romantic.
Yeah. And then they continued this conversation outward by interacting with people like Mendelssohn, who was, of course, at the same time really trying to get Bach into the concert halls in the Gewandhaus here in Leipzig, and so that was an influential part of getting Bach's music heard. Robert Schumann, writing in his new journal for music about Bach's works, publishing some unpublished works in his journal and getting the word out. And then on the performing side, Clara, Schumann, and Mendelssohn, who were performing it for audiences to hear and appreciate. For the first time, a huge amount of people heard Bach's music. Also, Mendelssohn played a big part in organizing the revival, the monument that was made in 1843. It was unveiled, and the Schumanns were, of course, there for that unveiling. Interesting story, Clara Schumann was so pregnant, she was at the unveiling 2 days before she gave birth to their second daughter. But it was important for them and for her to take part in this that had been in the planning for several years. They had been raising money through concerts. Mendelssohn was really active giving concerts to raise money for this monument. And then finally it was unveiled. And so she didn't want to miss that, but really that's quite a testament to her that 2 days before giving birth that she was there to appreciate this unveiling of the monument for somebody that they all revered so much.
Right. This monument of Bach, which was unveiled in 1843, is still standing right in front of the St. Thomas Church in Leipzig today. It is often overshadowed by the new monument, which was built in 1908 next to the church. So just about 30 steps from the new Bach Monument, which is the more famous one, where people take pictures, and right in front of St. Thomas Church now here we have, you call this the Old Bach Monument.
Yes, because it was already erected in 1843 and was funded by Felix Mendelssohn Bartholdy. Yes. So he did 3 benefit concerts to get the funding for this monument, including the 1841 reperformance of St. Matthew Passion here in St. Thomas. There are 4 reliefs, one on each side, and only one of them shows Bach. He's looking to the north to St. Thomas Church.
So right across the Old Bach Monument, here right in front of the St. Thomas Church, we have the Felix Mendelssohn Monument.
And it's really nice because in the winter, when there are no leaves on the trees,
they look at each other.
Yeah, they look at each other. So Mendelssohn and Bach, Mendelssohn, who funded the Bach Monument, can look at his Bach Monument.
Mendelssohn is holding a baton. That he is one of the first conductor, I believe, to conduct with a baton. So I think that is very special.
And so he is symbolized here as the conductor and as the music director of the Gewandhaus Orchestra. It was first put in front of the second Gewandhaus in the 1880s. And this second Gewandhaus was demolished in the Second World War and doesn't exist anymore. And yes, it was re-erected here in front of St. Thomas Church. We are now entering St. John's Cemetery and the place where the old St. John's Church was placed. On 31st of July 1750, Bach was buried at St. John's Cemetery. The church was rebuilt in the late 19th century and they rediscovered Bach's grave and brought his bones into the new St. John Church. There was a vault. This new church was demolished in the Second World War. The tower of the church still existed and it was standing here until the 1970s or even 80s or something like that. This is the place of this church tower. And then they broke it down.
And so where we're standing right now, and this is where the St. John's Church used to be.
Yes.
And the cemetery is behind. The Grassi Museum, which is a very, very famous museum.
Yes, especially famous for its collection of musical instruments.
This is the cemetery where Bach's body was buried.
Yes, his body was brought here in 31st of July 1750. He was buried here. And well, this is the oldest graveyard in Leipzig. It's over 500 years old, and well, not only Bach, but all the Thomaskantors and all people from Leipzig were buried here. This is a part of the graveyard that still exists, but it's nowadays even smaller than it was in the 18th century. And the exact place where Bach was buried is nowadays not existing because it was completely rebuilt. And Bach's bones after the World War in 1950 were brought to St. Thomas Church.
Bach was buried in 1750 in the cemetery outside of the church, but later in early 20th century, because Bach became more and more famous.
Right.
They wanted to have him back here in the church. Now it's always covered with flowers from people all over the world. Once I saw letters here written from a guy from Pakistan actually saying, "Thank you so much, J.S. Bach. I did this pilgrimage here to your grave just to say thank you for your music." That's the place he belongs and where any Bach pilgrimage ends.
We have here a Bible of the Leipzig Town Council, a wonderful book, gilded with ornaments, and this book, this Bible has been used if somebody applied for a new job or got his new job. He had to confirm, he had to take his hand there and say, "I swear by God and by my religion that I will fulfill my duties." So we could have the J.S. Bach DNA here also on this book. Despite all problems and all things, he was a strong Lutheran.
Yeah.
He was a strong believer. He was an expert of the Bible, because we know it from some handwritten editions in the Karloff Bible, who's now stored in the US. But we also know it from his music that he was a keen studier of the gospel. He did very well know what was inside, and I think he had, despite all his problems, he had right up to the end a strong belief, and he died as a faithful Christian. So this Bible was not his own one, but it was maybe the most important book in his life and the most important source of his creative inspiration. More important than all musical inspirations in the end was the Bible, was the gospel. So.
When I think of Bach in my childhood, I think of Sunday breakfast with a cantata. I didn't know Sunday breakfast without cantata could exist, you know. And Christmas with Christmas oratorio. Bach is, you know, it's bread and butter, and it's the guiding star for me as a musician and as a person. The whole idea of making music not as myself as a person or as someone on stage putting on a show. Bach always brings me back to the core of the message of bringing something to the people in the audience.
He was a true believer. He really makes you believe. Bach was writing all his music out of his belief, out of his faith.
I once read a book by a theologist, I think. He said, the world has never seen a man really dedicating his life to God and what impact it could have on the world. And that I read that sentence and I thought, there was one guy. There was Bach. He wrote on all his scores, he wrote this Soli Deo Gloria. And he has an impact on the whole world today. And his music is still more alive than in his times, connecting people all over the world. And he's still alive through his music and through, of course, through his big faith in God.
From his composition, we know that he's not only an accomplished musician, but also a theologian.
Yeah, of course. And
I mean, he's making biblical references everywhere in his composition.
You can enjoy his music also if you have no idea of these things because of the sheer quality. But if you get a little bit insight in these things, you get much more joy, you get much deeper. Robert Schumann in the 19th century says, you will never be finished with Bach. There is no discussion among musicians about Bach's quality. Some prefer Haydn, some prefer Mozart, some say Wagner isn't a musician at all, but in Bach everybody believes in Bach.
And I guess that when someone say that they do not like Bach, it reflects more of who they are than who Bach really is.
Sometimes I write a booklet or I do some professional things on Bach's music, and I start to cry in some moments that this music is so touching. It's unbelievable what he does in that moment.
Yeah, and then knowing all the background, how these pieces were created, Bach constantly was under time pressure when creating all these cantatas, so week by week, even the Passion. So he always maintained this highest level of composing, no matter if he was composing for St. Thomas Boys, for some virtuoso players.
He was an unbreakable artist. Other persons would have changed their style or would have made compromises or would have given up music entirely or whatever. But he was unbreakable, and he was believing right to the end that he will succeed, maybe not in his life, but later on.
And ultimately, Bach, as a musician, as a person, as a believer, he's the same person. Very vulnerable, very transparent. Therefore, his music speaks directly to us.
Okay, let's back up.
Oh my gosh, your face is so red.
This dream of becoming a pianist, wanted to study with her teacher, and that probably is too loud.
This choir loft was named after a certain bird. Swallow? Is that Schweiben? Schweiben. Shall we Google this now?
Sure.
Yeah? Give me a second. Schweiben.
15, 16, 17 years after that.
Wow.
Oh no, this was incorrect. It was 12 years.
So it looks to me that it's Brahms. So here we have your discovery.
So here we have your
在宗教改革声乐的这一块部
I think I was sitting there and you were sitting here. Am I right?
Yes, I remember it.
Yeah? Yeah, now you have to say, did I ever tell you the entire story?
Sorry.
Yeah?
Okay.
Maybe that could be the best bridge.
And do as the composer intended. And so that's the school bell, which is also a part of our museum.
Many people, many Leipzigers, I do it again. Do it again. Do it again.